All right, we're live. I am Scott Ritzheimer, CEO of Eight Figure Focus, where we help businesses get clear. And we're going through a series, if this is your first time joining me, we're going through a series where we walk through each of the life cycle stages in the predictable success life cycle and say, what is it that a business who is in this stage needs to do in the current environment, in the middle of falling out of COVID-19. So today we're going to talk about the sixth stage. And it's actually the last video in our series, because if your business was in death rattle, the seventh stage, there's not a whole lot here. Unfortunately, we've seen some of these businesses, local businesses, big businesses, they're being sold, they're being sold off just for asset value, they're closing their doors, and they're not going to open again. So this is a challenge there. But here, we're in the sixth stage. We call this stage Big Rut, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But I want to recap everyone on the process that we've gone through so far, just so that we're all clear on where we're at, what type of businesses we're talking about. So Big Rut businesses are about as far as you can get from stage one, which is early struggle. And early struggle is those first, 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years of a business where it's fighting to find its profitable and sustainable market. And it does this by really keying in on cash, on profitability early on, and focusing on that market that it can not only get into but offer value to, and start its process of scaling, albeit very small, but start from there. Once you've found that market, you've proven, hey, we have a market, we can sell to that market, and you get into the ground where you're in profitable territory for the first time in a long time, at least. That's when you enter stage two, which is fun. And fun isn't easy, but man, it's fun. You're mining that market. You're selling like crazy. Customers are happy. They're ordering all kinds of stuff, and somehow you bend over backwards to make it work. And it's just this glorious time in the organization's history. Challenging time still if you're in fun and hit by COVID. We talked about that, but all in all, those organizations are positioned, if they play their game and their strategy, to do pretty well coming back out of the crisis, if they can preserve cash and stay out of that early struggle period. Then fun, success begets success, and at the end of the day, it also begins to create a lack of clarity inside the organization because of complexity. And that complexity builds until the point where it causes us to make mistakes that cause the business to not move forward, or to slow our growth, reduce our profitability, increase employee churn. All the things you don't want to do, they tend to start popping up in whitewater. And it's because we haven't yet figured out how to marry process in with the visionary risk taking that got us through early struggle and through fun, and is actually now in need of balance with systems and processes. Businesses in whitewater, super challenging in normal times, even more challenging in the midst of the crisis that we're in right now. Fortunately for them, if they're willing to take that hit and kind of take a step back, it really enables them to kind of refine those fun days and actually extend fun a little bit further. But if you're able to push through, you're able to get through whitewater. Some businesses are really able to tackle whitewater now. They've recognized, hey, we are where we are. We know what we need to do to move forward, and it's time to go there. And so they're pushing through, adding systems and processes, working on their org chart, working with their leadership teams, and they get that marriage, that synergy between process, execution, and vision, all three of them put together. And that's when you get into predictable success. And if you're listening to this and your business is not in predictable success, then I can tell you that you want to get it there, because the best way to recession-proof, crisis-proof your business is to get it into predictable success. Sure, it doesn't answer every single thing that could possibly go wrong, and businesses in predictable success, some of them are struggling, but I can't tell you how many businesses I've talked to, and they look at me and they say, Scott, it's almost embarrassing to say, like, I almost don't want to talk about it because so many people are struggling, but we've had our best year ever. And that's what it is to be in predictable success. You can actually cope with the changes that are going on outside. Instead of growth happening to you, growth happens because of you. And that happens again by that marriage of vision and execution and process. But what tends to happen in a business that's in predictable success is they start to lean into those processes a little too much. They said, hey, process got us out of whitewater, and that was a nasty period. And more processes probably going to help us, and more processes and more processes. And then all of a sudden, form starts to edge out function. Slide decks with PowerPoint presentations start to replace real decision making. FaceTime becomes more important than actually delivering, and the organization slips into treadmill. Now, treadmill is it's one of those tough periods in a business's life cycle, because that visionary drive and this overwhelming amount of processes start to conflict and clash, and you feel it inside the organization, not necessarily from the outside. They tend to look pretty good. In fact, this is when the media is finally catching on that something good is happening, and so you'll see lots of organizations who inside are in treadmill, but on the outside they couldn't do anything wrong from a market standpoint, from a media standpoint especially. But inside, the very existence of the business is at risk. They can keep carrying their momentum forward and process, get safer, get more secure, get rid of more risk, and the only way to do that is to really silence or dramatically reduce the voice of the visionary in the organization. Many founders will quit here, or sell, or the company will be bought out by professional, and what that marks, it genuinely is the beginning of the end. Because if you don't hang on to that visionary risk-taking and treadmill, then you slide into the sixth and penultimate stage, which is the big rut. And the difference between the big rut and treadmill is that in the big rut, you don't even know that something's wrong anymore. In fact, organizations that were in the big rut at the start of the crisis, most of them have really not done a whole lot since. Maybe they sent some folks home, they did a little bit of a remote work thing, but by and large, they've put things on hold. Why? Because they had a good thing going and they don't want to lose it. They don't want to risk messing that up. And so they have the cash reserves to sit and wait it out. But what we're going to talk about today is why that's really the exact wrong strategy. And to do that, there's a metaphor that I like to share, and I included it in the article that went out today. And it's one of, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but here in Georgia, we get these crazy pop-up thunderstorms that come through, and it'll be sunny and raining, and then all of a sudden thunder, wind, and it's crazy. And inevitably, where my house is, we're at the very end of the power line. So our power goes out pretty much every time. It's ridiculous, but it happens because trees are falling down every single time. And what I like to do sometimes after a big storm is I'll take my dog for a walk in the woods back behind our house. And it never ceases to amaze me, the trees that go down. And sometimes it's the dead tree that, okay, you can get that. But the other day I was walking back there after one of these big storms, and this beautiful, beautiful tree, huge, you couldn't fit your arms around it, had completely toppled over. And when I was a little ways out, it was like, how in the world could this tree go down? And it was in the middle of the woods. There shouldn't be a ton of wind there. It looked healthy, but as I got closer and closer, especially when I could see the root system and even into parts of the tree where it had broken open, it had been dead inside for a long, long time. You see, we tend to think we can judge, I don't know anything about trees, but I can judge a tree's health by the outside. Does it have leaves on it? Does it not have leaves on it? We think that we can judge companies by a set of metrics that we put in a quarterly report. We tend to think we can judge people by the way that they show up in a single interview. Whatever it is, we have this tendency to look at how things appear. But in Big Rut, things appear really, really good. The reality of it is deep down inside, there's something desperately wrong. And businesses in Big Rut, they really struggle with this because, like this tree that went down, it had been through multiple storms in the past, significant storms. We had tornadoes, we had the tropical storm that came through in Georgia a year or two back, but it had survived all of this. And what that leads in an organization's life is it leads them to believe, that they're too big to fail. And we saw this in the 2008, 2009 crisis. We see it now where they feel like they can just wait it out and things will get back to normal and they'll be fine because they have enough cash, they have a big enough brand, whatever it may be. But the reality of it is they've lost their visionary voice. They're not innovating like they were before. And they're on a long, slow slide to irrelevancy. The problem is when crisis comes, that long and slow can become short and fast very, very quickly. And that's really what we don't want to do. That's why I wrote this article. It's why I'm sharing this today is what should businesses do if they're in the big rut, if they want to turn it around. Now, typically in the big rut, you're not going to really even admit that something's wrong. It's difficult to recognize something's wrong until way, way after it's too late. And so in normal times, it's almost impossible for a big rut organization to turn around because there isn't the political will to do it. Some have done it. Home Depot, arguably, treadmill, maybe even Big Rut. It is possible, but it requires the organization to go through a gut-wrenching experience where it really refines itself and its identity, and it's not a comfortable process. And being in the Big Rut is comfortable. And when faced with uncomfortable or comfortable, we almost always choose comfortable, individually and organizationally. But in this case, what I want to really key on is, okay, we can't ride it out. We can't do nothing. What should we do? And another example that I like to use when talking about big rut organizations is the Titanic, right? The Titanic, it couldn't be sunk. It was on its maiden voyage and it happened. We all know the end of the story. And there's something about the way that the Titanic sunk that I think is a useful analogy for us in business. So if your business is in the big rut, there's something that we can understand from this. And what had happened was the Titanic tried to turn just slightly, and there's different maneuvers in the way that you can do it. None of that really matters. But by turning just slightly, it ended up tearing the side of the ship in multiple places. Now, by tearing in multiple places, it exceeded the ship's capacity to seal off the different bulkheads because instead of taking all the impact on the front, filling the first bulkhead, second, maybe third, the water was simultaneously rushing into the first, second, third, I think fourth, even fifth bulkhead. And it was just too much for the systems inside of the business, inside of the ship to handle. And we all know the end of the story. What we can learn from that, though, is if the Titanic had smashed head on, there's some people who believe that it could have actually survived and limped back to port because the impact would have been severe. It would have been a PR disaster, right? But it could have saved the ship. And that's really what you need to do if you're leading a business in the big rut right now, is you need to take the hit. You need to recognize what's actually going on, saying, hey, we've lost this visionary thing a long time ago, and we need to turn around. Now, fortunately, if you're in a big rut organization, this is actually the perfect time to do it. You see, what happens is a crisis externally allows us the opportunity that we rarely have in the big rut to turn things around. There's a few reasons for that. First one is there's no guarantee that you'll survive the next one. Just like that giant oak tree that survived countless storms, it was this one storm that did the trick. And so using the fact that, hey, there's a crisis, it has hurt us, let's talk about what this really means for us. It gives you an opportunity to start those conversations. Even more importantly, it allows you to align your external and internal problems, right? External problem is market stuff's going crazy. Who knows what's going to happen? Our customers aren't here. We can't open our stores. We're afraid of our folks getting sick. We're trying to take care of everybody. Our internal problem is we've lost our visionary risk taking. And And so Big Rut businesses, they actually have an opportunity now to align those two problems and overlay them. And the thing about this, from a communication standpoint, from a political will standpoint, from just a clarity and a narrative standpoint, what it does is it actually gives the whole company a villain to vanquish. It allows you to actually kind of, under the cover of crisis, to start implementing the changes that need to happen in the organization. And when you do, the third part of this is that there's a greater upside to taking risks. So, in normal circumstances, we're choosing between comfortable and uncomfortable. Well, now there's a choice between uncomfortable and uncomfortable. And so that gap is narrower. Secondly, most people who are in Big Rut, most of your competition are going to be in Big Rut, and they're riding it out. And so there's a bigger opportunity for someone who's willing to take the risks right now than there is under normal circumstances, when taking those risks is slightly easier. But how do you do that? Okay, so there's a few things that you need to do to reinvent your Big Rut business, and they're not easy. I'm not gonna, there's no easy way around this. They're difficult. The first one, you have to overhaul leadership. The leadership team that excels in the Big Rut is the exact cause, to a certain extent, of the reason that you're in Big Rut. Big Rut leaders are not going to get you out of Big Rut. They're going to help you take advantage of Big Rut, go deeper into Big Rut, maybe extend your time there, but they're not going to get you out. So first thing is overhauling leadership. Second thing is you got to make painful decisions. And there's a number of these, we'll talk through them in a second. And then really, where's this all going? We're trying to create capacity for risk taking. We're trying to reprioritize risk taking across the entire organization. So let's jump into these real quick. First one here, you have to overhaul leadership. And like I said earlier, there's no easy way around this. You have to move from what is likely a very synergistic, very processor-driven leadership team. You have to move that back to a more visionary, more operator-centric team. We're moving to visionaries who have ideas and dreams and aspirations and big, hairy, audacious goals, in Jim Collins' phrase, and going after that next mountaintop. And you have operators who thrive on hearing that vision and running with it. They are ruthless finishers. They're doers. They love to get stuff done. They may be a little rough around the edges sometimes, but that's what moves the organization forward. In the Big Rut, you probably have a very processor, very synergist centered leadership team or leadership culture, and you've got to start moving that back to that visionary operator mindset. To an extent, you have to go beyond what would be a normal balance of all of them, and to shift things around, to pull yourself back, you've got to be way more on the side of visionary, way more on the side of operator, so that you can actually do that. And you have to do it quickly. You have to be decisive. The crisis, for one, isn't going to last forever. Your business may not be able to survive forever in the midst of the crisis. And so you have to get to a point where you're uncomfortable, and you have to do it very quickly. If you try to ease into discomfort, you're never going to make it all the way there. But you have to rip the Band-Aid off and get into that discomfort very, very quickly. It's hard, but it's your responsibility as the leader if you're going to save the business that you lead. Next one here is to make painful decisions. And if you're in the Big Rut, this usually means cutting. It usually means cutting very important portions of your business, not instantly, right? There's in the Big Rut, there's nothing you can do overnight, but setting a sunset on some of your past most profitable business units, products, services, whatever they may be, recognizing that in the future, those aren't going to be the most successful. And so one of the tools that I frequently use and I teach all the time is to create a stop doing list. And if you're in the Big Rut, this is where you need to start. You need to get those leaders in place, and then together with that VO centric leadership team, you have to start deciding, what are we going to stop doing? What units are we going to cut off? What are we going to do to create room, to create capacity for whatever we're going to invent next? Clayton Christensen, in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, talks about this, where businesses often fall into a trap that new products don't solve growth problems for big organizations. And so what happens is the big organization grows and grows and grows and grows, and it grows with its market, and then up from underneath, another business comes with a smaller, potentially less profitable, lower dollar item product that starts to undercut the market. And the Big Rut organization can avoid it for a while, but eventually what happens is that smaller, more nimble product actually starts to eat into the market share, and the Big Rut organization doesn't respond until it's too late. If it's not too late for you, then this crisis is a great opportunity for you to stop that cycle. Check out The Innovator's Dilemma. You can also check out the book, The Innovator's Solution. Fantastic books on the topic. And there's actually a few examples of this in an article I wrote on the blog on Treadmill that you can take a look at. All right, next one here is we have to reprioritize risk taking. So we've got fresh leadership. We have made plans for what we're going to cut, what we're going to stop, what we're going to sunset, and we've set dates for those. Now what we need to do is we have to cast a compelling vision. And nothing sparks visionary activity, nothing sparks that drive in operators throughout the organization like a clear vision. Businesses in the Big Rut, they have these complex strategies and decks and all of this. What I'm talking about here is simplifying it all the way down to one thing. Patrick Lencioni calls it a rallying cry. You could call it the big, hairy, audacious goal, 40X. It could be the wildly important goal. Any name you put to it, what's important is that it be communicated clearly and that it be a compelling vision. The business is not going to move on its own. You have to come up with a way of casting that vision and calling your employees to action. Second part of reprioritizing risk-taking is to normalize failure. Most businesses in the Big Rut have lost the capacity to fail well. They have restricted movement so much inside the organization that employees don't feel the liberty to try if failure is one of the possibilities. And so what you have to do, you have to, from the very top, model, over-communicate, fund, encourage, risk-taking, and make it okay for people to fail if they're taking the appropriate risks. Doesn't mean it's carte blanche, doesn't mean we can throw compliance out the door, but we have to make sure that compliance isn't king. Compliance is a tool to keep us, out of trouble, but vision is what's going to move the business forward, not compliance. And finally, you got to celebrate that risk taking. So we're normalizing failure, but you also have to celebrate the risks when they're taken. And do it publicly as often as you can. Do it as consistently, do it as frequently as you can, because what you celebrate is what your business will pursue. And a business in Big Rut does not typically celebrate risk-taking. They talk about innovation, but they don't really do it. And the best way for you to really reinstitutionalize risk-taking is to celebrate it. Talk about it publicly. When there's a failure, celebrate the fact that risks were taken and that celebrate the learning that happens in the process. Whatever you do, you have to make sure that people know it's okay to fail, and defining where it's okay to fail. So turning a business around that's stuck in the Big Rut is no easy task. Like I said earlier, in normal times, it's virtually impossible. In times of crisis like these, you have a massive tailwind pushing you further into Big Rut, but you also have an opportunity to harness that wind and turn things around. It can be done. I believe you can do it. If that's what you want to do, if that's your heart cry, then I'd absolutely encourage you to go after it. If you'd like help crafting a specific strategy to get your business back in winning form, then call our office. We'd love to help get you the right strategy, get your team moving in the right direction, and help you get back to your winning days. Thanks. Have a great day.